Hello, I'm Darkwell Bled. Happy Halloween and welcome back to Beyond the Rusted Gate. Today's episode dips into sci-fi horror. It is a short story from my second collection of short stories and is titled The Tree That Birthed Him. The stars shone brightly just as they had 2 nights prior on the evening Larry Carroll had been born. Things had been different then. Then he had had the comfortable certainty of conviction that comes with youth. Now, as he stood staring at the tree that birthed him, he reflected on how things had grown far more complicated. Choice had never come into it. Larry hadn't chosen to be born, no one does, and had he known what it would entail, he surely would have chosen to remain safely non-existent. But Larry had never been given that option, and so here he stood. He had been nothing, and then there was a brief struggle for life, and now he was what? He was Larry Carroll. Or was he? There was now no one more qualified to be Larry Carroll than he, and there was no one he was more like than Larry. The only person he had ever met had had no doubt in their mind that he was Larry, and he was, in almost every way, barring some slight biological and neurological differences, completely identical to what Larry had been. It is unlikely any detective would suspect or condemn him as an imposter. He had the memory, he had the body, and he had the cadence of Larry. There were, of course, small differences in the mind, mainly experiences that he had had that Larry had lacked. Experiences that made him the latest link in a chain that extended beyond history. Experiences and knowledge about what he was that Larry wasn't. This knowledge imposed itself on him with great significance. It was the hauntingly devastating awareness that he was, in fact, not Larry Carroll. Larry Carroll was dead. On Thursday the 30th of April, Larry Carroll, having discovered a strange tree growing in his backyard and touched it, was paralyzed, covered in sap, and then digested. The sap had then hardened, hollowed, filled with nutrients, and then, on Friday the 1st of May, it had cracked and given birth to Larry Carroll. Not the Larry Carroll who had died, but this new creature who, beyond being anything else, was Larry Carroll. It is fortunate that Larry had been born on the weekend. It takes time to fully comprehend the knowledge extracted through the pupal stage of development, and never before had his line encountered and digested a creature of such complexity as Larry had been. His line had never before incorporated and so was not accustomed to things such as language, clothes, cars, and coffee breaks, let alone the concept of work. It was a staggering amount of information and nuance to take in that seemingly dwarfed the full ancestral memory accumulated through a long history of replicative assimilation and reproduction. For the first time in his line's long history, Larry found himself contemplating just how terrible a task it was for his species to perform mimicry on any creature that it ensnared. Was mimicry the correct word? There were more subtleties to how this human species perceives the world than he was accustomed to, and this was becoming ever more apparent with every passing moment. Mimicry, he fathomed, implied imitation, and in many senses went hand in hand with mockery. Was he a mockery of what Larry had been? Was he a mere mimic of the man he had digested? A mockery was usually considered as less than what was being mocked. Was he, as the latest link in his line, less than the creature he had digested? Or had he, by adding Larry to his line, become more than either his line or Larry had ever been? Larry tried out the word copy. In his mind it felt more accurate than mimic, but something inside him whispered other, crueler suggestions. Suggestions like perversion and abomination. That voice, too, was new to Larry's line, as were most nuances that made up the human experience. He could recall all previous beings that had been brought into his line. His was a branch that led back to the first of his species. When he reproduced, which, judging by the welling inside him, he soon would, his consciousness would end, but all those who branched from him would recall it as their own, just as he could recall all who had led to him. In turn, those who branched from them would spawn dozens more branches themselves, and his experience would be propagated through all of them across the planet, the galaxy, and time itself. All who branched from and followed him would know his line and his experience, but he himself would end, and this was the first time any being in his line, and so far as he was aware his species, had ever been aware and felt troubled by this knowledge. The real Larry Carroll was dead. Dead in the very real, very normal human usage of the term. Dead. The word echoed through the head of his copy. Dead, gone, deceased, no more. There was no continuity for the former Larry Carroll. He had had consciousness, and that consciousness had now ended. He had undergone a reverse birth, and now he no longer existed. His replacement felt keenly that the original would have found no solace in knowing that another creature with his exact memory and knowledge now existed. He felt this because deep down he knew that he too would find no solace in those who branched from him continuing from his own non-existence. For the first time in his line's long history of experience, he mourned, both for the one he had digested and for what end would inevitably come for him. Why should he feel like this? His line had absorbed and copied countless living creatures before. They were all part of him. He could recall their existence millennia ago with the same sense that he could recall Larry's last weekend. He could recall having been on countless planets, asteroids, and in space itself. His line predated even the first creature absorbed into it to have had the concept and sense of time. But in all those eons that his ancestral memory stretched back, they had never felt... what? Regret? Compassion? Love? These were all symptoms of a greater problem. When on Saturday the 2nd of May, a female of the species, Larry's girlfriend, had come over, he had felt a love for her. None in his line had experienced such a thing before. It was a strong caring for what she had been to Larry and what she now was to him. While she was there, he had pretended that all that he was Larry and that his experiences did not go beyond Larry's, and it was wonderful, and when she left it was greatly disturbing. He had never had to pretend to be a spouse before. He did not even think he needed to do so now. It didn't benefit the furtherance of his species in any way that he could think of. A partner, in the human sense of the word, was not necessary for his spawning. His way was to diminish into spores, which would propagate into life trees that would digest and copy those who came into contact with them, resulting in branches and further lines. It didn't fully matter what creature was to be digested. A bird could just as easily have been ensnared by the life tree that had birthed him as Larry had been. There would be no specific benefit drawn from Larry's girlfriend being digested. So why had he bothered to spend time with this human creature with whom he himself had never interacted? The answer was simple yet baffling. To be around her had felt nice. Love and compassion were something no previous chain in his line would have been able to contextualize. They hadn't even had an awareness of self to any true degree, and instead existed on animalistic tendencies. The other ancestral links that predated him had been akin to a bug, a worm, a spider, a crustacean, a rodent. They had never been those exactly, but they were the closest equivalents within Larry's understanding. And therein lay the problem. Larry's understanding. The ability to contextualize thought, feeling, individuality. These were Larry's domain. These were experiences and comprehensions to which none who made up his line had ever before been exposed. Until Larry, his line had not had to deal with self-awareness. His evolutionary priority was to reproduce, but before Larry, he didn't understand the concept of evolutionary theory, he just performed it. Without knowledge or self-awareness, his species absorbed, mimicked, and reproduced. There was that word again, mimic, but perhaps it was true. Perhaps he was a mockery. Perhaps he was an abomination. His evolutionary biological drives were dependent on this process. There was no coupling for his species, and before he had digested Larry, he had never felt a keen desire for it, nor had he ever felt a revulsion for his own natural ways and impulses. His species' way was to kill, to murder, to abhorrently take a life for one's own benefit. Before he had digested Larry, he had within his line's ancestral memory no understanding of morality. To kill meant nothing to him because meaning had yet to exist within his comprehension as an abstract. Now imbued with moral agency, he felt he was forced to question everything, and did so in ways stranger than he felt he could ever have understood. He reasoned with examples and metaphor and simile in thought experiments. He considered that a cancer cell kills not from hatred, but wondered whether it could continue to do so with such cold indifference were it to know what it did. And while he considered this, he marveled and simultaneously felt horror at reason and what it was to think. Come Saturday night, Larry had not slept since birth. He had an overwhelming urge to spawn, to catch the train into the center of population where he could guarantee the most branching, to release his hold on this strange bipedal form, to explode outwards in a sea of spores that would lead to more life trees, more sap cocoons, more mockeries, endless lines, branches that would branch and branch again, to fulfill his biological drives more successfully than in any other environment in which his line had ever been. The only price to do so would be the human race, and the only cost genocide. Humans were a devastating creature to be, and to be an evolutionarily driven parasite one day and a grown man the next was jarring. He had learned more from being Larry in 2 days than his line had learned in a millennium. He had a responsibility to his species, but he hadn't understood responsibility until he had been human. So, in a sense, did he not too have a responsibility to humanity? There was no knowing if he was the last of his species. His life tree may well have been the only one seeded out of the great blackness that was space. Did this matter? Did he have a responsibility to his species beyond evolutionary drives? And what of mankind? And what if he did spawn? Would it be a monstrous cruelty to not only destroy mankind, but in doing so condemn all who branched from him? They would all now carry Larry's knowledge and convictions. His convictions. Their convictions. They would all know and feel what he had done and know and feel that it was wrong. They would know what it was to kill and to have killed and to want to kill again. Was it worse to fail your obligation to a species and not reproduce, or worse to reproduce and in doing so condemn all who followed to carry the experience of slaughter and genocide? Larry had liked being himself, and now he, despite being a mockery, despite being just the latest link in the longest of chains, found that he liked being Larry. He liked to laugh and to think and to talk. He now enjoyed food, and not just for its nutritional necessity, and he now felt affection beyond that which was biologically driven. He had learned more from this form than the combined knowledge of every link in his ancestral line before him. He had learned of love, thought, self-awareness, and kinship. He had also learned about combustible materials. No other creature predating him in his line had ever had a sense of duty, but he felt keenly that if he were to abandon duty, those who followed would be forever tainted with self-loathing by his failure to act. Larry had only worn the facade of humanity for 2 days, but now saw himself as more human than anything else, and he felt himself a threat to mankind and all that he loved. He was the monster that the man whom he had digested feared as a child. He was the plague that nightmares warn of. His species was the harbinger of death to all who thought and loved. He was a mockery, a perversion, and an abomination. His line could not be allowed to branch. The gasoline Larry doused himself in would be enough to kill any spores that escaped his burning corpse. He doused himself for the friends he had never met but remembered fondly, for the girl who loved what he wished that he was, for the parents who were proud of achievements he remembered but had no part in, and even for the football team he supported but had never seen the game they play. Knowing that with him his line would end, but that mankind would live on, Larry Carroll lit the flame and sat below the tree that had birthed him. Thanks for listening, and hopefully that's all come out okay. I've got a bit of a cold while recording this, so it might sound a bit more nasally than normal, but I wanted to record something for Halloween, so I've powered through. I hope you enjoy the spooky season. I hope you've got cool costumes and lots of candy, and I will see you all next fortnight. Until then, I am Darkwell Bled, and you've been listening to Beyond the Rusted Gate, a reading of The Tree That Birthed Him from my second collection of short stories, Screams from Beyond the Crypt, available in paperback with links in the description below.